My name is Carrie Williams, and at 62, I never imagined my own son would throw me out onto the street. For 15 years, after my husband died, I'd shared my home with James and his wife Tiffany, helping raise their children while they struggled financially. I even put my retirement savings toward their mortgage. Then came that fateful day when their lottery ticket hit the jackpot, $43 million. Instead of celebration, I got cruelty. Before we continue, drop a like and comment where you're watching from if you've ever been betrayed by family. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Before all this lottery drama began, I was simply Carrie Williams, a dedicated elementary school teacher for over 30 years in our small community of Riverdale. I loved my classroom, my students, and the simple life my husband, Michael, and I had built together. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but we were comfortable in our modest three-bedroom home that we'd finally paid off just before Michael's unexpected death. I was only 47 when Michael suffered that massive heart attack while working in our garden. One minute he was planting tomatoes, the next, he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, but I had no choice but to keep going. Our only son, James, was in his final year of college at the time, and I was determined he would finish his education despite our loss. Those early years of widowhood were incredibly difficult. My teacher's salary alone wasn't enough to cover all our expenses, plus James's tuition, so I took on tutoring jobs after school and weekend work at a local bookstore. Sleep became a luxury, but seeing James graduate was worth every sacrifice. I'll never forget how proud I felt watching him accept his business degree. Michael would have been beaming with pride too. James had always been the center of our world from the moment he was born. As an only child, he received all our love and attention. Perhaps that was part of the problem. We may have sheltered him too much from life's harsher realities. James met Tiffany during his junior year of college. She was studying fashion marketing and had big dreams of working for a luxury brand in New York. When he first brought her home, I welcomed her with open arms, cooking her favorite meals and making her feel like part of our family. But privately, I had concerns. There was something calculating in the way she looked at our modest home, as if mentally cataloging everything and finding it lacking. Still, I kept those thoughts to myself. James was clearly smitten, and who was I to judge his choice of partner? When they announced their engagement shortly after graduation, I threw them the nicest celebration I could afford. Tiffany seemed disappointed by the simple backyard party, but James was happy, and that's what mattered to me. The young couple's troubles began almost immediately after their honeymoon. James struggled to find a suitable position in his field, eventually settling for an entry-level marketing job with minimal pay. Tiffany's fashion industry dreams faded quickly when no luxury brands showed interest in her portfolio. Instead, she took a sales position at a mall clothing store, which she considered beneath her talents. Their first business venture, a small online boutique selling imported accessories, failed within 6 months. The second attempt, a social media marketing agency, lasted slightly longer but ultimately collapsed under the weight of their inexperience and mounting debt. By their third year of marriage, they were drowning financially with student loans, credit card debt, and a small business loan in default. When James called me, voice-breaking, to explain they could no longer afford their apartment rent, I didn't hesitate to offer them my home. James was 30 at the time, and I believed it would be a temporary arrangement, perhaps a year or two, while they regrouped and rebuilt their financial foundation. I never imagined it would stretch into 15 years. Shortly after moving in, Tiffany announced her pregnancy with Madison. 9 months later, when I held my first grandchild, any reservations I had about their extended stay disappeared. 2 years later came Alex, and 3 years after that, little Emma completed our family. My house was full, noisy, and sometimes chaotic, but also filled with the laughter of children, something I had missed since James grew up. During those years, I became much more than a grandmother. While James and Tiffany worked, I became the primary caretaker for the children, preparing their meals, helping with homework, attending school events, and nurturing them through childhood illnesses. My retirement, which I had once dreamed would include travel and hobbies, instead revolved around school schedules and pediatrician appointments. But I didn't mind. Those children became my world, and I loved them fiercely. What did trouble me was the gradual shift in how Tiffany treated me. The initial gratitude for my help disappeared, replaced by expectation and eventually entitlement. She began treating me more like hired help than family. She would leave lists of household tasks she expected me to complete while she was at work. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, even how I folded the laundry. When I gently suggested that we share these responsibilities more equitably, she would roll her eyes and make comments about how I had nothing else to do anyway. James witnessed this disrespect but remained silent. When I would catch his eye during Tiffany's more cutting remarks, he would look away, unwilling to stand up for me. His passive acceptance of his wife's behavior hurt more than her actual words. This was the boy I had raised alone after his father died, the child for whom I had sacrificed everything. His silence felt like betrayal. Despite these tensions, I continued to support them financially. My teacher's pension wasn't substantial, but it was reliable, and I contributed significantly to household expenses. When their car needed replacing, I helped with the down payment. When unexpected medical bills arose, I covered them without hesitation. I never kept track of exactly how much I gave them over the years, but it was certainly tens of thousands of dollars. Then came the turning point that would ultimately lead to our current situation. 5 years ago, with 3 growing children, James and Tiffany began complaining about the size of my home. They wanted more space, separate rooms for each child, a home office, and the status that came with a newer, larger house in a more upscale neighborhood. They found a beautiful 2-story colonial in Oakwood Heights, twice the size of my home and with all the amenities they desired. But with their credit history and modest incomes, no bank would approve them for the necessary mortgage. That's when they turned to me once again. I agreed to withdraw $175,000 from my retirement fund, nearly half of my life savings, to help them with the down payment. The understanding was that this was not a gift, but a loan they would repay when their financial situation improved. I trusted my son, but my dear friend Barbara, who happened to be an attorney, insisted that we put the agreement in writing. The day we signed those documents in Barbara's office remains vivid in my memory. James seemed uncomfortable shifting in his seat and avoiding my eyes as Barbara explained the terms. Tiffany kept checking her watch, clearly annoyed by the formality of the process. But Barbara was insistent. "This protects everyone," she explained firmly. "Carrie is making a significant investment in your future, and this promissory note simply acknowledges your intention to repay that investment." James signed reluctantly, but what he and Tiffany didn't fully appreciate was Barbara's additional stipulation that my name be added to the deed as co-owner of the property. This was her way of securing my investment, ensuring I wouldn't lose everything if something went wrong. "It's just a formality," Barbara assured them when Tiffany objected. "Once you've repaid the loan in full, Carrie can sign her interest over to you completely." Little did any of us know then how crucial that formality would become. It was an ordinary Saturday morning when everything changed. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, blueberry pancakes, a family favorite, when I heard Tiffany's piercing scream from the living room. My first thought was that one of the children had been hurt, and I rushed toward the sound, heart pounding. Instead, I found Tiffany jumping up and down, clutching a piece of paper to her chest, while James stood nearby, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "We won! We actually won!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice higher than I'd ever heard it. $43 million, the Mega Millions jackpot. For a moment, I couldn't process her words. It seemed impossible, like something that happened to other people in news stories, not to our family. But when James confirmed it was true, showing me the matching numbers on their ticket and on the lottery website, reality began to sink in. The next hour was a blur of excitement. James ran out to buy champagne, something we rarely had in the house, and we all toasted to their good fortune over a special breakfast. The children caught our excitement without fully understanding its significance, laughing and dancing around the kitchen. I remember hugging James tightly, whispering how happy I was for him, how his father would have been so thrilled at this turn of events. "Now you'll be able to do all the things you've dreamed of," I told him, "and the children will have every advantage in life. If only I had known what was coming." The transformation in Tiffany was almost immediate and startling in its completeness. Before the champagne glasses were dry, she was on her phone making calls to luxury car dealerships, high-end real estate agents, and interior designers. Her voice took on a new tone, imperious, demanding, as if she'd been wealthy her entire life instead of just the past few hours. By noon, she had changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on her most expensive dress, one she usually saved for special occasions. Her makeup was reapplied, her hair restyled. She barely acknowledged the children's questions, waving them away with vague promises of toys and trips. James and Tiffany disappeared shortly after lunch, returning 5 hours later with shopping bags from stores I'd only seen in magazines. Tiffany modeled a diamond necklace that must have cost more than my annual pension. James had a new watch and designer clothes. Neither of them had thought to bring anything for the children or me. That evening, I offered to make dinner, but Tiffany announced they had reservations at La Maison, the most expensive restaurant in town. My first hint that something was wrong came when I asked what time we should be ready. "Oh," Tiffany said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We couldn't get enough seats for everyone. It's just James and me tonight. You don't mind watching the kids, do you? You always do such a good job with them." The dismissal stung, but I told myself not to be selfish. This was their moment, their celebration. Of course, they would want some time alone to process their good fortune and make plans. I spent the evening making pizza with my grandchildren, assuring them that, yes, their parents still loved them, even if they were acting strangely today. The real confrontation came the next morning. I was helping Emma with her cereal when Tiffany entered the kitchen wearing designer pajamas that still had the tags attached. She poured herself coffee and then stood directly across from me at the island counter. "Carrie," she said, using my first name as she always did, never Mom or even Mrs. Williams in all these years. "James and I have been talking, and now that our financial situation has changed, we need to make some changes around here." Her tone was businesslike, as if addressing an employee rather than family. James appeared behind her, hovering in the doorway rather than joining us at the counter. His face was unreadable, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "We need space and privacy to enjoy our new life," Tiffany continued. "This arrangement worked when we needed financial support, but now—" She waved her hand dismissively. "Things are different." At first, I didn't understand what she was implying. "Are you thinking of moving back to your own place?" I asked. "That makes sense. The children might need time to adjust, but I'm sure we can work out a smooth transition." Tiffany laughed a sharp sound without humor. "No, Carrie. You're the one who needs to move out. This is our house now." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Your house, I've lived here for 35 years. This is my home." "Was your home," she corrected. "We're buying it from you. Name your price. We can afford it now. But we need you gone within the week." I looked to James, expecting, hoping, he would step in, contradict his wife, show some sign of the son I had raised. Instead, he cleared his throat, awkwardly. "Mom, you've always talked about maybe getting a condo near the lake. Now you can afford the best one available. We'll make sure you're comfortable." "Comfortable?" I repeated the word, feeling foreign on my tongue. "You want to evict me from my own home, and you're concerned about my comfort." "Don't be so dramatic," Tiffany snapped. "We don't need your pathetic pension cash anymore. Just go die somewhere else. We're offering you more than fair compensation." Madison, who at 11 was old enough to understand the conversation, gasped at her mother's cruelty. Alex looked confused, and little Emma began to cry, softly sensing the tension. "Tiffany," James said quietly, the first hint of backbone he'd shown. "That's unnecessary." But he didn't contradict the substance of her statement, only her delivery. He didn't say I could stay. He didn't acknowledge that this was my home long before it was theirs. He stood there, passive as always, allowing this tremendous betrayal to unfold. "You have 3 days," Tiffany announced as if the matter was settled. "We've already scheduled decorators to begin work on Thursday." When I reached for Emma, who was stretching her arms toward me, seeking comfort, Tiffany intercepted, pulling the child away. "The kids need to get used to you not being around all the time," she said coldly. "No point dragging this out. I spent that afternoon in shock, moving mechanically through the house that had been my home for decades. Every corner held memories. Michael and I bringing newborn James home from the hospital, celebrating birthdays and holidays, weathering grief and hardship, welcoming grandchildren. How could I possibly pack up a lifetime in 3 days? In desperation, I called friends looking for temporary housing while I figured out my next steps. Most were sympathetic but had no spare room. Eventually, my friend Sarah offered her sofa for a week or 2. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. As I began sorting through my belongings, trying to determine what to take and what to leave, Tiffany appeared, offering to help. Her assistance consisted mainly of pointing out items that were outdated or unnecessary. Twice, I heard the sound of breaking glass followed by insincere apologies. "Oops, clumsy me," she said after dropping a crystal vase Michael had given me on our 10th anniversary. Well, it was old anyway. James was conspicuously absent during this process. He took the children out for most of the day, presumably to shield them from the unpleasantness, but more likely to avoid facing what he was allowing to happen. When they returned, the children ran to my room, faces streaked with ice cream and confusion. "Grandma, are you going on a trip?" Alex asked, eyeing the suitcases on my bed. Before I could answer, Tiffany appeared in the doorway. "Grandma's going to live somewhere else now," she said brightly. "Won't that be exciting for her?" My final night in the house was perhaps the most painful. From my bedroom, I could hear celebration downstairs. Tiffany's laughter, the pop of more champagne corks music playing too loudly. I sat alone among half-packed boxes, clutching the photo album that chronicled my life with Michael and James, wondering where I had gone so wrong with my son that he could discard me so easily when I was no longer useful to him. In the morning, I left before anyone else was awake. I couldn't bear another confrontation, another moment of seeing James's weakness or Tiffany's triumph. I called a taxi to take me to Sarah's apartment, leaving my key on the kitchen counter beside a note that simply read, "I hope your good fortune brings you happiness." What they didn't know was that I had one more call to make, to my friend Barbara. Not just my friend, but my attorney. And she had some very interesting insights about my legal position in all of this. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I caught sight of my neighbor Martha peeking through her curtains. I knew exactly what she saw. A 62-year-old woman with puffy eyes and a few hastily packed suitcases being driven away from her home of 3.5 decades. The picture of defeat. What Martha couldn't see was the steel that had begun to form in my spine. I may have been raised to be a lady, polite, accommodating, and reluctant to make scenes, but I was not raised to be a doormat, not even for my own son. Sarah met me at her apartment door with a warm hug and hot coffee. Her one-bedroom apartment was cramped but cozy, her couch already made up with sheets and a comforter for me. The kindness of true friendship nearly broke through the shock that had sustained me through the morning. "I've already called Barbara," Sarah said, taking one of my suitcases. "She's coming over at noon." Barbara Franklin had been my friend since we taught at the same elementary school 30 years ago. While I remained in the classroom, Barbara had left teaching to pursue law school in her 40s, a second career that perfectly suited her sharp mind and passion for justice. Over the years, she'd handled my will, my pension paperwork, and various legal matters that arose. She was also the attorney who had drawn up the paperwork when I loaned James and Tiffany money for their house. When Barbara arrived, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "They can't evict you," she stated flatly, pulling documents from her leather briefcase. "Not legally, and certainly not with 3 days' notice." I shook my head, confusion mixing with the emotional exhaustion. "It's their house now, isn't it? They won the lottery. They can buy me out." Barbara's expression sharpened. "No, Carrie, it's not their house. It's your house. Or, more accurately, it's 60% your house." This statement momentarily stunned me. "What do you mean? Remember the paperwork we filed when you gave them the down payment? You're not just a lender, you're a co-owner. Your name is on the deed as majority stakeholder." The memory returned slowly. I had signed so many documents that day, and Barbara had explained everything, but in my trust for James and desire to help him, I hadn't focused on the legal details. "I insisted on that clause to protect you," Barbara continued. "Given their financial history, I wanted to ensure your investment was secure. You own 60% of that house, Carrie. They can't sell it without your signature, and they certainly can't evict you from it." A small flame of hope flickered to life. "So I could go back?" "You could," Barbara confirmed, "with police escort if necessary. But before we take that step, there's more you should know." She pulled out another folder, this one containing bank statements and other financial records. "I've been doing some digging since you called yesterday. The mortgage payments on that house have come from a joint household account, an account that you've been contributing to regularly with your pension deposits. In fact, for the past 3 months, you're the only one who's made deposits to that account." The implications of this took a moment to register. "Are you saying I'm saying that the most recent mortgage payments were made with your money, not theirs. And there's more. Barbara reached into her purse and pulled out a small slip of paper, a lottery ticket receipt that looked familiar. You left this with the documents you brought to my office last month when we updated your will. It was stuck between some pages. I recognized it immediately, the convenience store receipt from when I'd picked up groceries and, on impulse, bought the weekly lottery tickets for the household pool. It was something we'd done for years. Each adult would contribute $5, and whoever went to the store would purchase the tickets. We'd check them together on Saturday mornings, usually with disappointing results. The winning ticket, Barbara said carefully, was purchased with your money from your joint household account on the day shown on this receipt. The timestamp matches what's been reported in the news. The room seemed to spin slightly. Are you saying that I'm saying that legally you have a claim to at least a portion of those winnings. The ticket was purchased with commingled funds from a household account to which you were a significant contributor. This revelation was almost too much to process on top of everything else. I sank back into Sarah's couch, trying to absorb this new information. I don't want their money, I said finally. I just wanted my family, my home. Barbara nodded sympathetically but remained practical. I understand, but knowing your legal position gives you options, Carrie. Options you didn't have an hour ago. Sarah, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. What would you suggest she do, Barbara? Barbara considered this for a moment. Nothing for now. Let's wait and see what develops. James and Tiffany have made some serious legal missteps here, but they don't know that yet. Sometimes the best strategy is to let people reveal their true character through their actions. I nodded, slowly torn between maternal instinct and self-preservation. Despite everything, James was still my son. The boy who had once brought me dandelion bouquets and homemade Mother's Day cards. The young man who had wept on my shoulder after his father's funeral. Could I really take legal action against him? Give it some time, Barbara advised, seeming to read my thoughts. Let's see if James comes to his senses on his own. I agreed to wait, though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The maternal instinct to reach out to try to fix things was nearly overwhelming. But Barbara was right. I needed to let James make his own choices, face his own consequences. Over the next week, I moved from Sarah's couch to Barbara's guest room, a more sustainable arrangement, while I figured out my next steps. Barbara brought more of my belongings from the house when James and Tiffany were out, including financial documents, photo albums, and my most treasured keepsakes. I tried to establish a new routine, volunteering at the local library to keep busy during the day, taking walks around Barbara's neighborhood in the evenings. I avoided social media, knowing I would only torture myself by looking at whatever Tiffany might be posting about their new life. But news has a way of finding you, especially in a small community like ours. Friends called with updates they thought I should know. The local paper ran stories about the hometown winners and their extravagant purchases, and despite my best efforts, snippets of information accumulated, painting a picture of what was happening with my son and his family. It didn't take long for James and Tiffany's story to become the talk of Riverdale. Our local newspaper, the Riverdale Register, ran a front-page story about the local family's $43 million windfall, complete with photos of James and Tiffany posing with an oversized check. In the interview, they spoke about their plans for travel philanthropy and investments. There was no mention of me or the fact that they had lived in my home for 15 years. Through the community grapevine, I learned that they had purchased a sprawling $6 million mansion in the Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in our county, without selling our original home. The property reportedly featured 7 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a home theater wine cellar, and indoor pool. Pictures appeared on social media showing Tiffany posing in various rooms with captions about finally living the life we deserve. Within 2 weeks of the lottery win, Tiffany had accumulated a collection of designer handbags worth more than my entire teacher's pension would pay over 10 years. James purchased 3 luxury vehicles, a sports car for himself, an SUV for Tiffany, and a weekend car they barely drove. Their driveway looked like a high-end dealership showroom. The children were enrolled in Westfield Academy, an exclusive private school that cost more per year than 4 years at the state university. Tiffany posted photos of them in their expensive new uniforms standing uncomfortably in front of their new home forced smiles on their faces. James abruptly quit his marketing job, apparently telling his boss that he didn't need to work for peanuts anymore. According to mutual friends, he'd made a scene in the office, criticizing company policies he'd previously defended and making disparaging remarks about colleagues who had once been his friends. I tried not to dwell on these reports, but it was difficult not to see how quickly money was changing them, or perhaps more accurately, revealing who they truly were beneath the surface. The spending was reckless, impulsive, and seemingly without any thought for the future. Barbara, with her practical mind, estimated they were burning through several $100,000 per week. At this rate, she observed dryly, even $43 million won't last as long as they think. The first signs of trouble appeared approximately 3 weeks after the win. Martha, my former neighbor who lived directly across from my old house, called to tell me she'd been hearing shouting coming from the property late at night. "They're back at the old house sometimes," she reported, "usually after midnight, and they're not happy, Carrie. The fighting is awful. Tiffany screaming about money and James shouting back about responsibility. Last night she threw something that broke one of the front windows." Then came an unexpected encounter at the Riverdale Mall where I'd gone to purchase new shoes. I was examining a sensible pair of walking shoes when I heard a familiar voice. "Grandma?" I turned to find Madison, my oldest grandchild, standing there in her new school uniform, eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like relief. "Mom and Aunt Kelly are in another store," she explained quickly, glancing over her shoulder. "They don't know I left." Before I could respond, she threw herself into my arms, hugging me tightly. "I miss you so much," she whispered. "We all do." We found a quiet corner in the food court where Madison poured out her feelings about the changes in their lives. The new house was huge and empty feeling. The new school was strict and the other students were unwelcoming. Her parents were rarely home, and when they were distracted or arguing. "Mom has all these new friends now," Madison said, picking at a French fry I'd bought her. "They're always at the house drinking champagne and talking really loud. Dad doesn't like them, but he doesn't say anything. He just goes to his study and closes the door." Most concerning were her descriptions of the children's new lives. With me no longer there to provide care and stability, they were often left with a rotating cast of hastily hired nannies, none of whom lasted more than a few days under Tiffany's demanding management. "Emma cries for you every night," Madison said, her own eyes filling with tears. "Mom tells her to stop being a baby, but she can't help it. She doesn't understand why you left us." I had to explain gently but truthfully that I hadn't chosen to leave them. Sometimes adults make decisions that hurt other people even without meaning to, I said, choosing my words carefully. "I love you all very much, and if it were up to me, I'd see you every day." Our conversation was cut short by a text message on Madison's phone, her mother looking for her. She hugged me one more time before rushing off, promising to tell her siblings she had seen me and that I was okay. That evening, I received my first contact from James since I'd left the house. Not a call, not a visit, but a text message. "Mom, do you have the family photo albums from when I was a kid? Tiffany wants to display some old photos in the new house." No apology, no inquiry about my welfare, no acknowledgement of what had transpired, just a request for something he wanted. I didn't reply. As the weeks passed, more troubling news filtered through to me. Tiffany had hired and fired 3 different interior design firms for the mansion, refusing to pay the last one completely because she didn't like the curtain fabric. They were being sued by contractors who had performed renovations on the property, but hadn't been paid in full. Local gossip reported that Tiffany had been involved in a public argument with a boutique owner who refused to close the store for a private shopping experience. James had been seen at the Highland Bar drinking alone in the afternoon, something he'd never done before. Most concerning were the text messages I began receiving from my grandchildren. Using Madison's phone, they would send me updates about their days, tell me they missed me, and occasionally send concerning messages about their parents' behavior. "Dad and Mom fought about money again," read one from Madison. "Dad said Mom is spending too fast, and she said he's not the boss of her." Another, presumably from Alex, though, on Madison's phone said simply, "When are you coming back, Grandma? Nothing's fun anymore." Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that James was beginning to look disheveled at social events. His designer clothes wrinkled, his new watch missing dark circles under his eyes. Tiffany, meanwhile, continued her spending spree, posting photos of ever more extravagant purchases and exotic weekend getaways, often without James or the children. Then came the news that confirmed Barbara's predictions about their financial mismanagement. A friend who worked at the county tax office informed me confidentially that James and Tiffany had failed to make proper arrangements for the substantial taxes due on their lottery winnings. They had taken the lump sum option without consulting financial advisors and now faced potential penalties for late payment of federal and state taxes. "They're in over their heads, Carrie," my friend warned. "This could get ugly fast." I took no pleasure in these reports. Despite everything, I still cared about James and worried about my grandchildren caught in the middle of this chaos. But I had taken Barbara's advice to heart. I would wait and watch, letting events unfold without my intervention. Sometimes the hardest part of parenting even adult children is allowing them to face the consequences of their own choices. I just didn't expect those consequences to arrive quite so quickly or dramatically. The breaking news story appeared on the local television station exactly 6 weeks after the lottery win. The headline alone was enough to stop me in my tracks as I was preparing dinner in Barbara's kitchen. "Local lottery winners under investigation for potential tax fraud." The report was light on specifics, citing only unnamed sources who claimed that James and Tiffany Williams had failed to comply with tax regulations related to their recent $43 million lottery win. The brief segment ended with the ominous statement that, according to legal experts, such investigations can result in significant penalties, including asset freezing during the investigation period. Barbara, who had been working in her home office, appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You saw the news?" I nodded, unable to find words for the mixture of vindication and concern I was feeling. "It's beginning," Barbara said quietly. "The consequences." The following morning, while Barbara was at work and I was alone in her house, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with my son for the first time in 6 weeks. James looked nothing like the jubilant lottery winner from the newspaper photos. His hair was uncombed, his expensive shirt wrinkled and stained. Most striking was his expression, a combination of desperation and shame that made him look much older than his 45 years. "Mom," he said, simply, his voice cracking slightly on the single syllable. I stood aside to let him enter, maintaining my composure, despite the surge of conflicting emotions his presence evoked. We sat in Barbara's living room, an awkward silence stretching between us until James finally spoke. "I guess you've heard about the tax investigation." "It was on the news," I replied, neutrally. He ran his hands through his unkempt hair. "It's worse than they're reporting. All our assets are frozen. The bank accounts, the new house, everything. We can't access any of the money until the investigation is complete." I waited, sensing there was more. "That's not the worst of it," he continued, staring down at his hands. "Tiffany, she made some investments without consulting me, against my better judgment." "What kind of investments?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "A friend of hers, someone she met after we won, convinced her to invest in a resort development in the Caribbean. $20 million. He paused, swallowing hard. "The friend disappeared last week. The development doesn't exist. The money's gone." The amount was staggering. Nearly half of their winnings vanished in a classic scam. I felt no satisfaction in this revelation, only sadness for my son's naivety and poor judgment. "There's more," James said, his voice now barely audible. "We took out loans against the lottery winnings before the accounts were frozen. High-interest loans from people who aren't very patient about repayment." "Loan sharks," I translated flatly. He nodded miserably. "They've started making threats, not just against me, but against Tiffany and the kids." For the first time, real fear pierced through my emotional armor. The children, my grandchildren, potentially in danger because of their parents' recklessness. "Where are the children now?" I asked sharply. "With Tiffany's sister Kelly. They're safe for now." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "But we're about to lose everything, Mom. The new mansion is in foreclosure already, Wendy. We missed the first 2 mortgage payments while the money was tied up in that fake investment. And with the tax investigation, we can't even sell it." "And my house?" I asked, emphasizing the possessive pronoun deliberately. The one you threw me out of. James had the grace to look ashamed. We're behind on those payments, too. The bank sent notices. I let the silence hang heavy between us, forcing him to be the one to articulate what he had come here to ask. Finally, he spoke the words. We need a place to stay, Mom. Just temporarily, until things settle down with the investigation and we can access the remaining funds. I asked. You and Tiffany. He shifted uncomfortably. Just me and the kids, actually. Tiffany, she left 3 days ago, said she needed space to think. Took what cash we had left and went to stay with a friend in the city. The full picture was becoming clearer now. James hadn't just lost his money, he was losing his marriage as well. The woman who had been so quick to throw me out when the money rolled in was equally quick to abandon him when it disappeared. Please, Mom, he said, desperation evident in his voice. I've made terrible mistakes. I let Tiffany influence me in ways I never should have. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. But the kids need stability right now. They need their grandmother. There it was, the appeal to my love for my grandchildren. And it worked, of course. I could never turn my back on those children regardless of how their parents had treated me, but that didn't mean I would make this easy for James. Tell me something, I said evenly. When Tiffany said those cruel things to me, when she told me to go die somewhere else, why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you stand up for me after everything I've done for you? James couldn't hold my gaze. I was weak, he admitted. I've always been weak where Tiffany is concerned. She has a way of taking over, making decisions. I just go along to keep the peace. That's not an excuse, I said firmly. That's a failure, James. A failure as a son, as a father, as a man. I raised you to have a backbone. I know, he whispered. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just don't know where else to turn. In that moment, looking at my broken son sitting in my friend's living room, I faced my own crucial decision. I could turn him away, let him face the full consequences of his choices without my intervention. It would be justified after how he had treated me. Or I could offer help with conditions, firm boundaries that would require real change on his part. The decision, when it came down to it, wasn't really about James at all. It was about the 3 innocent children caught in this mess and what kind of grandmother, what kind of person I wanted to be. I'll need to speak with Barbara, I said finally. And we'll need to meet at the house, my house, to discuss terms. This isn't going to be like before James. There will be conditions. Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by wariness at my mention of conditions. But he was in no position to negotiate, and he knew it. Whatever you say, Mom, just tell me when and where. As he rose to leave, a text message chimed on his phone. He checked it, his expression darkening. It's Tiffany, he said. She wants to meet at the house too, says she has a plan to fix everything. Somehow I doubted that whatever Tiffany was planning would align with my ideas of responsibility and consequences, but her inclusion would make the coming confrontation complete. All the players back where this drama began. Tomorrow, I decided. 2:00. I'll have Barbara with me. James nodded, already looking anxious about the prospect of facing his wife and mother together, as he should be. After he left, I called Barbara immediately, filling her in on the developments. She wasn't surprised by any of it. Classic lottery curse, she remarked. Though they've managed to burn through everything unusually quickly, most lottery disasters take a year or 2 to fully develop. James wants to move back in with the children, I told her. Tiffany's left him. Temporarily, I'm sure, Barbara said dryly. She'll be back once she realizes there might still be money to be salvaged from this wreck. Are you going to let them come back? I sighed, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. The children need stability, and honestly, I miss them terribly, but things can't go back to how they were before. No, Barbara agreed firmly. They absolutely cannot, which is why we're going to meet them with all the legal documentation ready. It's time they understood exactly where they stand, and where you stand. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Tomorrow would be difficult, confrontational, and probably emotional. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I would be entering the situation with full knowledge of my position and power. I was no longer the discarded mother being thrown away when convenient. I was Carrie Williams, and I was about to take back control of my life. The house, my house, looked different when I approached it the next day. Just 6 weeks of neglect had left the usually meticulous lawn overgrown, the flower beds I had lovingly tended now choked with weeds. A shattered window on the ground floor had been haphazardly covered with cardboard and duct tape. The overall impression was one of abandonment, a stark contrast to the pristine condition I had always maintained. Barbara parked her sensible sedan behind James's luxury SUV, one of the few assets not yet repossessed, and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before we exited the vehicle. "Remember, you're in the power position here," she reminded me. "No matter what Tiffany says or how James reacts, you hold the cards." We found James waiting in the living room, pacing nervously. The interior of the house reflected the same neglect as the exterior. Dust had accumulated on surfaces, mail was piled unopened on the entry table, and there were stains on the carpet that would likely never come out. My heart ached seeing my once beautiful home in such disarray. "Tiffany's on her way," James said by way of greeting. "She's running late." "Of course she is," Barbara muttered under her breath. We settled into an uncomfortable silence in the living room. I took my usual armchair, the one I'd sat in almost every evening for decades first, with Michael later alone. It felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a place you've only visited in dreams. 20 minutes later, the front door opened without a knock, and Tiffany swept in as if she still owned the place. Despite the financial catastrophe James had described, she was impeccably dressed in designer clothes, her hair and makeup flawless. The only sign of stress was a certain tightness around her eyes as she surveyed the room. Her expression hardened when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" Before James could respond, Barbara stood. "Mrs. Williams is here because this is her house. The better question might be, what are you doing here?" Tiffany's eyes narrowed as she assessed Barbara. "And you are Barbara Franklin, Mrs. Williams's attorney." This introduction seemed to momentarily throw Tiffany off balance, but she recovered quickly, turning to James. "You didn't tell me you were bringing lawyers into this. You didn't tell me you were emptying our emergency cash fund and disappearing for 3 days," he replied with uncharacteristic firmness. "I needed space to think," Tiffany said dismissively. "Anyway, I'm back now and I have a solution to our problems." She pulled a folded document from her designer handbag. "I've been talking to a developer who's interested in this property. The location is perfect for a small apartment complex. They're offering $700,000. James looked confused. "But we still owe on the mortgage." "We'd clear enough to pay off what we owe, settle some of the tax issues, and have a fresh start," Tiffany explained, as if speaking to a child. "We can rent somewhere modest while we sort out the rest of our financial situation." Throughout this exchange, I remained silent, watching. Tiffany hadn't even acknowledged my presence beyond her initial outburst. It was as if I were invisible, a non-entity in decisions about my own home. "There's just one small problem with your plan," Barbara interjected. "You don't have the authority to sell this property." Tiffany's perfectly arched eyebrows drew together. "Of course we do. It's our house." "Actually," Barbara said, opening her briefcase and extracting a document folder, "it isn't. Not entirely, at least." She placed the deed on the coffee table where everyone could see it. "As you can see, Mrs. Williams owns 60% interest in this property. Nothing can be sold without her signature, and she has no intention of selling." Tiffany stared at the document, then at James. "What is this? You told me we owned the house." James looked equally confused. "I thought we did. Mom gave us the down payment, but as a loan," Barbara clarified, "secured by her majority ownership interest in the property. This was all clearly explained when the documents were signed 5 years ago." A flush spread across Tiffany's face. "This is ridiculous. James, call our lawyer." "We can't afford a lawyer anymore," he reminded her quietly, "and all our legal documents were seized during the tax investigation." Tiffany's composure began to crack. "This is some kind of trick. You can't just claim ownership of our house." "It's not a claim," Barbara said calmly. "It's a legal fact established 5 years ago when you and James signed these documents." She tapped the folder for emphasis. "Documents that you apparently never bothered to read carefully." Until this point, I had remained quiet, observing the dynamics between James and Tiffany, gauging their reactions. Now, seeing Tiffany's growing fury and James's confusion, I decided it was time to speak. "I never wanted your money," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "All I ever wanted was to be treated with respect and dignity in my own home. The home where I raised James, where I helped raise your children." Tiffany turned to me, her eyes cold. "We offered to buy you out, generously. You could have had a new place of your own." "After telling me to go die somewhere else," I reminded her. "After 15 years of opening my home to you helping raise your children, contributing my pension to household expenses, you treated me like an inconvenience to be discarded when you no longer needed my money." "That's not fair," James interjected weakly. "We were going to take care of you." "By evicting me with 3 days' notice," I asked, looking directly at my son. "By allowing your wife to speak to me like I was nothing, by standing silently by while I packed up decades of memories." James had no response, his eyes dropping to the floor in shame. Barbara cleared her throat. "There's something else you both should know." She produced the lottery ticket receipt I had found. The winning lottery ticket was purchased using funds from the joint household account, an account to which Mrs. Williams was a regular contributor. In fact, her pension deposit was the most recent transaction before the ticket purchase. Time seemed to stop as the implications of this statement sank in. Tiffany was the first to recover her expression, transforming from shock to calculation in an instant. "You're saying the ticket was bought with Mom's money?" James asked slowly. "I'm saying that legally, Mrs. Williams has a strong claim to at least a portion of those lottery winnings," Barbara clarified, "given that her money was commingled with household funds in the account used for the purchase." Tiffany's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. The ticket was in our names, not hers." "The name on the ticket is only one factor courts consider in lottery disputes," Barbara explained with professional detachment. "The source of funds used to purchase the ticket is another significant factor. There's substantial legal precedent for this." As the reality of their situation became clear, I watched the last vestiges of Tiffany's composure crumble. She turned on James, her voice rising to a shriek. "Did you know about this? Is this why you insisted we come here today, so your mother could threaten us with more legal problems?" "I had no idea," James protested, looking genuinely stunned. "Mom, is this true? Are you going to claim part of the lottery money?" Before I could answer, Tiffany launched into a tirade, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "We don't have the money anyway, it's gone. The accounts are frozen, the investment was a scam, and what wasn't stolen is tied up in assets we can't access." She rounded on me again. "So, congratulations, you can have a claim to nothing." That's when I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I laughed, not bitterly or sarcastically, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. "Sweetie," I said deliberately, using Tiffany's condescending term of endearment, "did you even read whose name is on the deed, on the lottery ticket receipt, on any of the legal documents that control your life right now?" The room fell silent. Tiffany frozen in mid-gesture. James staring at me with dawning comprehension. "I don't want your money," I continued calmly. "I never did. What I wanted, what I deserved, was respect, consideration, basic human decency from my own family." I stood up suddenly, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years. "This house is my home. It always has been. I'm moving back in effective immediately. You two need to decide what you're going to do next, but whatever it is, it will be on my terms now." The look on Tiffany's face was one I'll never forget, a mixture of shock, outrage, and the first flickers of fear as she realized the tables had completely turned. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have," I replied simply. In that moment, standing in my living room with Barbara beside me, facing down the people who had so casually discarded me just weeks earlier, I felt a sense of justice that had been long denied. Not revenge. I took no pleasure in their misfortune, but the natural consequence of their actions returning to them in full measure. The confrontation was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. For the first time since that fateful lottery announcement, I was the one in control of what happened next. For several moments after my declaration, the living room remained completely silent. Barbara stood slightly behind me, a supportive presence radiating quiet approval. James had sunk onto the sofa, his head in his hands, the picture of defeat. Tiffany remained standing, her body rigid with tension, her eyes darting around as if seeking an escape route. Finally, James looked up, his expression a mixture of resignation and relief. "What are your terms, Mom?" Before I could answer, Tiffany exploded. "Terms? Are you serious? We don't need to negotiate with her. We can fight this." "With what money? With what lawyer?" James shot back, his voice rising uncharacteristically. "Haven't you done enough damage? We've lost everything because of your reckless spending and that scam investment your new friends talked you into." "My spending?" Tiffany's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "What about your gambling? Those business meetings at the casino? Did you think I didn't know?" As they turned on each other, releasing weeks of built-up resentment and blame, I exchanged glances with Barbara. This was an ugly but necessary process, the final disintegration of the facade they'd been maintaining. After several minutes of increasingly bitter accusations, I raised my hand, commanding silence with a teacher's authority that never quite leaves you. "That's enough," I said firmly. "This isn't helping anyone, least of all your children." At the mention of the children, both James and Tiffany fell silent, a flicker of shame crossing their faces. "Here are my conditions." I continued, my voice level and calm. "First, I am moving back into this house today. It is legally mine, and it will remain my primary residence." Neither James nor Tiffany objected, which was wise considering their lack of legal standing. "Second, if the children are to live here, and I very much want them to have the stability they desperately need right now, both of you will need to attend family counseling. Your behavior has traumatized them, and healing that damage begins with acknowledging it." James nodded slowly. Tiffany pressed her lips together, but didn't argue. "Third, any remaining lottery funds that may eventually be released after the tax issues are resolved will be placed in a managed trust for the children's education and future needs. Neither of you will have direct access to those funds." "That's not fair," Tiffany protested. "It was our ticket. Purchased with household funds to which I contributed," I reminded her. "Consider this a compromise. I could pursue a legal claim for a portion of those winnings, but instead I'm suggesting they be secured for your children's benefit." Barbara nodded approvingly. "That's quite generous considering the circumstances." I turned specifically to James. "Fourth, you need to take responsibility for your future. That means finding employment, managing your finances responsibly, and being the father your children need. No more passive acceptance of destructive decisions." For the first time in our confrontation, James met my eyes directly. "I will, Mom. I promise." Finally, I addressed them both. "Last but not least, I expect to be treated with respect in my own home. No more cruel comments, no more treating me like a servant or an inconvenience. If you can't manage that basic courtesy, you'll need to find alternative arrangements." I paused, letting my words sink in. "Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." Tiffany's response was immediate and predictable. "This is blackmail. I won't be controlled like this." She grabbed her designer purse from the coffee table. "James, we're leaving. Now." But James didn't move. He remained seated, looking at me rather than his wife. "The terms are fair, Tiffany. More than fair considering what we did." "You can't be serious," she exclaimed. "You're choosing her over me after everything we've built together." "What have we built?" James asked quietly. "We've destroyed more than we've created. Look around you. This house is falling apart after just 6 weeks without Mom. Our marriage is in shambles. Our children are staying with your sister because neither of us was capable of providing them stability. We need help, and Mom is offering it despite how terribly we treated her." Tiffany's expression hardened as she realized James wasn't going to follow her this time. "Fine. Stay with Mommy if that's what you want. I deserve better than this family anyway." She stormed toward the door, pausing only to deliver one final parting shot. "Don't come crawling back when my lawyer contacts you about divorce proceedings. I'll be taking what's left of our assets." "There's nothing left to take," James said softly, but she was already gone, the front door slamming behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. In the silence that followed Tiffany's dramatic exit, Barbara checked her watch. I have another appointment soon. Will you be all right here, Carrie? I nodded, feeling strangely calm despite the emotional confrontation. I'll be fine. This is my home after all. After Barbara left, James and I sat in awkward silence for several minutes. There was so much to say, yet words seemed inadequate for the breach of trust between us. I'm so sorry, Mom, he finally said, his voice breaking. I don't even know where to begin making amends for how I treated you. The beginning is always a good place to start, I replied, not unkindly. And the beginning is acknowledging what went wrong. Over the next 2 hours, we had the most honest conversation we'd shared in decades. James admitted how he had always struggled to stand up to Tiffany, how her forceful personality had gradually eroded his confidence and independence over the years. He acknowledged his responsibility in allowing her to treat me disrespectfully, and his failure to intervene when she demanded I leave. The money changed her instantly, he explained, though not excusing their behavior. But if I'm honest, it just magnified what was already there. The entitlement, the materialism. I saw those qualities from the beginning, but ignored them because I was infatuated. We discussed practical matters too. How to handle the tax investigation, the foreclosure on the mansion. They could no longer afford the outstanding debts to legitimate creditors and the more concerning ones to loan sharks. I'll help you navigate this, I promised. But you need to be completely transparent about every financial obligation, every mistake, every decision that brought us here. By evening, we had drafted a preliminary plan for moving forward. The first priority was bringing the children home from Tiffany's sister's house. James called Kelly, who agreed to bring them the following day. Next was addressing the most pressing financial concerns. Barbara would help negotiate with creditors and work with the tax authorities to resolve the investigation. As James prepared to leave for the night, he would stay at a friend's house until we had prepared the children for the new living arrangements. He paused at the door. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? He asked, the vulnerability in his voice reminding me of the little boy he had once been. Forgiveness is a process, not an event, I told him truthfully. It will take time to rebuild trust. But you're my son, James. I never stopped loving you, even when your actions hurt me deeply. After he left, I walked slowly through my home, reacquainting myself with spaces that had once been as familiar as my own reflection. There was damage to repair, both to the physical structure and to the family that had inhabited it. Neither would be quick or easy to fix. But as I settled into my bedroom that night, the same room where I had slept beside Michael for decades, where I had nursed James through childhood illnesses, where I had wept alone after being told to leave, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where I belonged. This was my home, my sanctuary, my place in the world. The journey ahead would be challenging. Re-establishing boundaries with James, creating a stable environment for my grandchildren, possibly dealing with legal proceedings if Tiffany followed through on her threat of divorce and tried to claim non-existent assets. But, for the first time in weeks, I faced these challenges from a position of strength rather than victimhood. Sometimes, life's hardest lessons come when we least expect them and from the people we trusted most. The lottery that my son and his wife thought would solve all their problems had instead revealed character flaws money couldn't fix. But perhaps in losing their fortune, they, especially James, might find something more valuable: integrity, responsibility, and the true meaning of family. As for me, I had discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. At 62, I was beginning a new chapter, not the quiet retirement I had once envisioned, but a life rich with purpose and renewed connections. There would be difficult days ahead, but also moments of joy as I welcomed my grandchildren back into the home where they belonged. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you really have. And what I had always had, was enough. 6 months passed in what felt like both an instant and an eternity. The house that had once echoed with tension and conflict slowly transformed back into a home filled with stability and cautious happiness. Each day brought small victories and occasional setbacks, but the overall trajectory was one of healing and growth. The grandchildren returned the day after our confrontation, their faces lighting up when they saw me waiting in the doorway. Emma, at just 7 years old, broke away from her aunt's hand and ran to me, flinging herself into my arms with such force that I nearly lost my balance. "Grandma, you came back," she cried, burying her face against my shoulder. "No, sweetheart," I corrected gently. "I didn't come back. This is my home. I never really left in my heart." The transition wasn't seamless, of course. The children had questions about their mother's absence, about why they were moving back to the old house instead of the mansion, with the swimming pool about the tense conversations between adults that would suddenly stop when they entered a room. We answered as honestly as age-appropriate explanations would allow, emphasizing that the changes were not their fault and that they were deeply loved regardless of the adults' problems. James moved into the guest room downstairs, a symbolic demotion from the master suite he had once shared with Tiffany, but a practical accommodation that gave everyone necessary space. True to his word, he began the difficult process of rebuilding his life from the ruins of the lottery disaster. His first step was finding employment. Not an easy task, given his abrupt and somewhat notorious departure from his previous company. Eventually, through a former colleague's recommendation, he secured a position at a small marketing firm across town. The salary was modest compared to his previous earnings, but it provided a stable income and, more importantly, a sense of purpose and routine. Family counseling proved challenging but essential. Twice weekly, we sat together with Dr. Mercer, a family therapist specializing in children affected by parental conflict. The initial sessions were painful, with Madison especially vocal about her feelings of abandonment and confusion during the tumultuous lottery period. James struggled to hear his daughter's perspective, but committed to the process, taking responsibility for his part in their trauma, instead of deflecting blame solely onto Tiffany. The financial aftermath of the lottery debacle was complicated and ongoing. Barbara worked tirelessly to negotiate with creditors, settle tax obligations, and untangle the web of financial mistakes James and Tiffany had made. The tax investigation ultimately resulted in significant penalties, but no criminal charges, thanks to evidence that the errors stemmed from ignorance rather than intentional fraud. The mansion was lost to foreclosure selling at auction for far less than James and Tiffany had paid just months earlier. The luxury vehicles were repossessed designer clothes and jewelry sold to settle debts. The friends, who had flocked around them during their brief period of wealth, disappeared as quickly as the money had. Tiffany filed for divorce as threatened, but her hopes for a substantial settlement were dashed by the reality of their financial situation. There were simply no assets left to divide. She made sporadic contact with the children during the first few months, occasional phone calls or brief visits that left them confused and emotional. Eventually, these contacts became less frequent as she established a new life in another state with someone she had met during her investment adventures. Throughout these challenges, our home became an anchor of stability. I resumed my routines, tending the garden, preparing family meals, helping with homework in the evenings. James gradually took on more parental responsibilities, learning to be present and engaged with his children in ways he hadn't been before. We established new traditions: Sunday game nights, Saturday morning pancakes, reading together before bedtime, small rituals that created a sense of security and normalcy. The remaining lottery funds, significantly diminished by taxes, penalties, and debt repayments, were eventually released from their frozen state and, as agreed, placed in a trust for the children's education. It wasn't the $43 million they had initially won, but it was enough to ensure the children would have opportunities for college and perhaps graduate studies if they chose that path. On a crisp autumn evening, 6 months to the day from when I had reclaimed my home, we sat around the dining table for a simple family dinner. The meal wasn't elaborate: a roast chicken, vegetables from my garden, fresh bread I had baked that morning, but the atmosphere was relaxed and genuine in a way that expensive restaurant meals never had been. James had received his first modest promotion that day, recognition of his hard work and renewed dedication. Madison had earned the lead in her school play. Alex had improved his math grades significantly. Even little Emma had accomplishments to share. She had learned to ride her bicycle without training wheels. As we shared these small victories, I looked around the table at these people who had been through so much together. James caught my eye and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes in a way I hadn't seen since before the lottery chaos began. "I've been thinking a lot about wealth lately," he said, setting down his fork. About what it means to be truly rich. The children looked at him with curiosity. They had heard enough about when we were rich to associate the word with the brief, tumultuous lottery period. I thought wealth meant having expensive things, living in a mansion, never worrying about bills, James continued. But I was wrong. Real wealth is sitting around a table with people who love you unconditionally. It's having a home that feels safe and warm. It's knowing who you can count on when everything falls apart. He reached for my hand across the table. Mom, what you gave us, what you've always given us, is the true meaning of wealth. And I'm so sorry it took losing everything to make me see that. The children nodded solemnly, perhaps not fully grasping the depth of his words, but sensing their importance. Madison, wise beyond her 12 years, added her own observation. The big house was nice, but I never slept well there. It didn't feel like home. Home is where Grandma is, Emma declared with the simple clarity of childhood. James squeezed my hand. They're right, you know. You are the heart of this family. I don't deserve the second chance you've given me, but I promise I won't waste it. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, James and I sat on the back porch watching the stars emerge in the early evening sky. The autumn air was crisp, requiring sweaters, but not yet blankets. It was my favorite time of year, a season of transformation and preparation for the quiet renewal of winter. I had a letter from Tiffany today, James said quietly. She's getting remarried. Someone with money, apparently. I nodded, unsurprised. Tiffany had always been drawn to wealth and status. Are you okay? I asked, watching his profile in the fading light. He considered the question seriously before answering. I am. Not just okay, but better than I've been in years. I feel clear, like I've been living in a fog for so long that I forgot what it was like to see clearly. Clarity often comes after loss, I observed. It's one of life's more difficult teaching methods. What I lost wasn't real, James said, his voice steady. It was an illusion. The money, the status, even my marriage to Tiffany. What's real is this, being here with you and the kids, rebuilding something genuine and lasting. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. From inside came the faint melody of Madison practicing her lines for the school play, accompanied by Alex's occasional commentary. Do you have regrets? James asked suddenly. About how everything happened? About taking us back in after how we treated you? I considered his question carefully, wanting to give him the honest answer he deserved. I regret the pain everyone experienced, especially the children, I said finally. But I don't regret where we've ended up. Sometimes the path to wisdom involves walking through fire. James nodded, understanding the metaphor. We had all been transformed by the fire of this experience. Weaknesses burned away, strengths, tempered new growth emerging from the ashes of what was lost. I have a question for you, I said, turning toward the audience. I've been sharing this story with all along. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have taken your family back after such betrayal, or would you have chosen a different path? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found something valuable in my story, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Sometimes, sharing our most painful moments can help others navigate their own challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love and respect we share with those around us. The journey hasn't been easy, and we still have challenges ahead, but sitting here with my son, knowing my grandchildren sleep safely upstairs, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for the difficult lessons we've learned. Sometimes, life's greatest blessings come disguised as our worst disasters, and sometimes when someone tells you to just go die somewhere else, the universe has a way of showing them exactly whose name is on the deed to their future.